Whether or not you realize it, we all are wearing labels. And for as long as I can remember, the label that I strived for more than anything was the label of being worthy. See, I felt like I needed to prove myself no matter what I did to be able to show that I was worthy, and ultimately so that I could have the label of being loved. Here's the ironic part about all this. From school to sports and even serving at church, I just felt like I constantly needed to live into this label. But here's the funny thing. Nobody ever told me that I wasn't worthy, that I wasn't loved, even told me that I needed this label on myself. This was a label that I convinced myself to have. And so in order to earn that label, let me tell you, I began to wear lots of other labels. Here's just a few of them. I began to try to be a perfectionist. I tried to begin to be a people pleaser. I wore the label of being smart, the one with all of the answers. Even throughout elementary and middle school, and even a little bit of high school, being a teacher's pet. I was known and had the label of being a straight A student, of being a dependable person. In sports, I was an athlete, so I was athletic. I ran cross country and track. And ultimately, I did all of that so that I could be a winner. In the midst of all these labels that I added subconsciously, I forgot what label I was even trying to wear in the first place. I wore all of these labels instead of trying to wear the label of being worthy and loved. And I think if you take a minute to pause and think about your own life, I think you may realize that you might have the same thing be true for you. Because here's the question I have for you. What labels are you wearing? Just a few that I thought of with our students team. You might be wearing the label of being dependable because you want to be a dependable person. Once again, you might wear the label of being a winner. Or maybe for you, it's not being a winner, but it's actually being a loser.
Loser. Hey, I've heard this call before. I'll bet you have.
For you, you might feel like you also are a smart person, but for some of us, we wear the label and the title of being stupid. For some of us, we are people who are viewed as soft. Or maybe we're people who are viewed with a tough exterior. Potentially, maybe you're wearing the label of being anxious all the time, or maybe you feel like you have this label of being stressed. Maybe you're depressed or angry, or maybe you're known and wear the label of being a comedian, or I think that everyone's talking about this right now in the world, a Swiftie. I mean, you might also have the label of being a brother or a sister. You could add a son or a daughter, or an athlete, or a troublemaker. I think we all, in some ways, probably in this room, wear the title and the label of being a student. And if you're in middle school and high schooler, you're probably also a teenager. But here's the important question. These are all potential labels that you might be wearing. What is your label? Maybe it's based off an interest you have. Maybe it's what you say. Maybe it's what you do. Maybe it's just what you're known for. Because here's the reality. Everywhere you turn, labels are being added. You're being categorized, whether you like it or not. Labels that tell you who you're supposed to be and who you're supposed to live up to. Labels based off the color of your skin. Maybe your sexual preferences or even your gender. And while these labels can cause a lot of damage and be harmful and hold a lot of power, you'll notice that not all of these labels are bad. Because what I've learned and become more and more convinced of is actually labels behind the labels that we all have that we may not even be aware of that hold the true power over us. Labels that aren't a title as much as what our hearts truly desire. And ironically, I think it's maybe these types of labels where we want to be relevant. We want to be popular. We want to be powerful. And we do all of those because we often, unfortunately, wear the title of being unloved. So in light of this, How do we choose the labels that we wear? And how can we resist the ones that we don't really want to wear? How do we learn to wear labels that give us life instead of picking the ones that drain us? Labels that address our true desires of being relevant, of popular, powerful, of being loved. And if you follow Jesus, where does God fit into all of this? Because here's something that you might find encouraging. Jesus wasn't immune to having labels thrust upon him. I mean, he was fully God and fully human, and people tried to tell him who he was and who he was supposed to be. I mean, he is the Messiah, the Son of God. Imagine the shoes that he had to step into, to live into, the pressure he had to be able to wear those labels. And while those labels were kind of growing up, it got worse as he began to start his ministry. There were so many people that wanted to tell him who he was and what he needed to be and to do. And in this, he even had the devil directly, like in person, try to tell him who he was supposed to be. And we're gonna pick up that story today in Matthew 4, if you wanna go and turn there. It is in this moment that the devil begins to try to tempt Jesus, to begin to try to put labels on him right before Jesus is about to take his ministry public, right before he's about to burst on the scene. This is where we pick up and see Jesus. In Matthew chapter 4, it says, "Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry." I think that might be a gross oversimplification there. I'm like hungry after just even like 40 minutes. The tempter came to him and said, "If you are the Son of God, if you are truly who you're supposed to be, tell these stones to become bread." And it's in this moment that Jesus answered, "It is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word comes from the mouth of God." See, while these are all temptations, these were labels the devil was trying to thrust on him. And this first one, this idea of like, well, go ahead and just like tell these stones to become bread, once again, was him trying to wear the label of being relevant. Then the devil took him to the holy city and had him stand on the highest point of the temple and said, "If you are the Son of God," once again, if you are who you say you are, "throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift you up in their hands, so that you will not strike your foot against the stone." The temptation or the label to be popular. And Jesus answered him, "It is also written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Label number 2. Now, label number 3, the devil again took Jesus to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world, showed him all of their splendor. He says, "All this I will give to you," he said, "if you will bow down and worship me." And Jesus said to him, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Then the devil left him, and angels came and attended him. Once again, label number 3, to be powerful. You'll notice in each of these instances, Jesus was able to resist what the devil was trying to do. The devil was trying to place these labels on him. And once again, Jesus kept resisting and resisting. He didn't feel like he had to try to prove his worth, to show that he was known or demonstrate his influence. How was Jesus able to resist these labels that the world was trying to thrust on him? Jesus' secret, and the one that's actually available to us even today, is found in the story before the story. Right there in chapter 3, we read this story of Jesus getting baptized. And it's in this moment that God the Son, God the Father, and God the Spirit, in one of the few instances of Scripture, are together in the same place. And here's what happens. Jesus goes to John the Baptist and gets baptized. And here's what God the Father says to God the Son. He says in verse 17, "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased." Because here is the secret. Jesus knew whose he was and who he was. See, at the end of the day, if you want to be able to shed these labels right here, the world's placing on you, the labels that you even place onto you, you can't just get rid of these labels. You can't just rip them off in one fell swoop, because the reality is there's always going to be some that get stuck. What you need to do is not just take the labels off and throw them away. You need to begin to replace them with some other labels. You need to know who is the person that's trying to label you. Because at the end of the day, God says that you are worthy, that you are known, and that you can have influence. But the key here is you have to know who that is coming from. And so here are the 3 steps, the process in order to really begin to do this. First, you need to become aware of the lies. You need to begin to learn to know where these lies are coming from. Begin to be aware that there are needs behind those labels. After you do that, you need to begin to replace those lies with the truth, because Jesus knew what was true. Jesus knew that he belonged to the Father. And in this, he began to wear the labels that God created you to wear. You need to replace it with the truth. And you're gonna have a great opportunity here in groups in a few moments to be able to work on doing just that as you begin to identify lies and replace them to the truth. Because at the end of the day, you have to be connected to the source. You have to know what is true in order to begin to replace the lies. And the 3rd step in this process is to repeat regularly in community. So once again, know the lies, replace them with the truth, and repeat regularly in community. Because here's the reality. As much as I wore all of those labels previously, I still wear those labels way more than I would like to admit to. Because the reality is this is a process that we have to commit our life to. And that's why step number 3 is to repeat regularly in community. Here's the cool thing. You're in a community right now. If you allow it to be that community, can be that community for you to be able to do this. And maybe one other thing that I found really helpful as I think about repeating regularly in community is not to keep trying to not wear the labels, but instead realize that I'm training to not wear them. It's one of those things where you can try to run a marathon, just go out and try to run 26 miles. Let me tell you, you're probably not gonna be successful. You need to begin the process of training. So train, don't try. And so in order for us to begin to practice this, in order for us to replace or identify the lies, replace the lies with truth, and begin to repeat regularly in community, I want to end today, before going to groups, with this breath prayer. Breath prayer is this idea of as you breathe, you're able to say these phrases over and over again. In a lot of ways today, be able to remind yourself of the truth. And this is something you can do throughout the whole week. And this is what I'd love to challenge you to do. Every time you begin to see that you're wearing these labels, but you're wearing these lies, that you go back to the truth and not just rip them off, but you begin to replace them with these things. Because I think God's words for Jesus are also true for you. Because here's what I know is true. You are God's son or God's daughter. You are loved, and God is also well pleased with you. Once again, you are God's son or daughter, whom he loves, and with you, he is well pleased. And so here is the breath prayer that I would love for you to repeat. And so I'm gonna say it both ways, and then together we're gonna say it, and you're gonna insert whatever makes applicable to me. And this is what God is telling you. So you're gonna say it like God is saying it to you in this very moment. This is my son, whom I love. With him, I am well pleased. Or you're gonna say, this is my daughter, whom I love. With her, I am well pleased. So let's go ahead and repeat it. Everybody right now, you know what you're gonna say in this moment. On the count of 3, 1, 2, 3. This is my son, whom I love. With him, I am well pleased. One more time. This is my son, whom I love. With him, I am well pleased. Here's the reality. This isn't gonna help overnight. But if you commit to this process over the long haul, you can begin to change who you are. You can begin to shed those life-draining labels, those labels that are thrust upon you, and begin to accept the labels that God created for you. Allow these words to be true and to be the thing that you repeat over and over and over again, and even in groups as you identify what labels need to be let go of. This is my son or daughter, whom I love. With them, I am well pleased. Let's go to groups.